Welcome to step one of building an anti-bias classroom, examining policies and procedures for bias. We are so excited that you have joined us. I am Sarah Howell, co-founder and director of programming and strategic planning for the Anti-Bias Educator, an educational consulting firm that helps educators create equitable learning environments so that every student in their care is seen, heard, and affirmed. Our journey together as the anti-bias educator began years ago with a collaborative professional development opportunity that Stephanie and I designed and facilitated at our school for other educators. We realized that our colleagues wanted to go beyond the theoretical learning surrounding DEI, but really were not sure of where to start or what the next steps were in their personal and professional development. We know that DEI work can be hard, but you have taken an important next step in bettering your practices, and we are excited to help you along your journey to build the equitable learning environment you know your students deserve. If you've not yet watched our introductory video, we encourage you to pause this one, click on the link in the description below to the intro to watch that first, and then come back to step one. The brief introduction will give you more information into the background about what we've included in this video series and why. Additionally, we have created an accompanying ebook for you for free for this series, which you can use to follow along with each one of our videos. We will guide you step by step through the process of taking some critical steps to building your anti-bias classroom. If you need to, go ahead and pause this video, go download the free ebook from our website using the link below in the description. If you already have the ebook downloaded or printed out and are ready to continue, then just keep watching. So now that you have your ebook downloaded, let's get started. Step one to building an anti-bias classroom is examining your policies and procedures for bias. But what exactly does that mean, and why is it important for the students in your classroom? Well, you as the classroom educator have a lot of autonomy and power over how those expectations and procedures get established in your room. There are many ways that you can dramatically change the course or tone of the learning environment, the student experience, and even those behaviors in your classroom just by tweaking and changing certain policies and procedures. And this can mean anything from, how students ask to use the restroom or to see the school nurse, to what they're expected to wear and the dress code, to homework policies, communicating student progress home, and much more. And at first glance, some of these things might seem pretty basic or like very simple decisions. However, they can have such a profound effect on your students' learning experience. And more often than not, some of these policies and procedures actually can be rooted in those biased assumptions or processes that might actually cause harm to your students and even possibly their families. And so by questioning these assumptions you make and the policies which might seem like common sense to you, you can openly and honestly examine the values you are communicating to your students about when, where, and how they show up to your classroom. Students know when things aren't fair, and they know when they are in an environment that has policies and practices that really have set them up not to succeed or to fail. And so by examining those basic classroom rules or practices, you can root out some of those biased expectations that undermine your ability to create the equitable classroom that you want, where all of your students are seen, heard, and affirmed. Some of this has to do with actually how your brain functions. When a student's cognitive load is burdened by kind of random or inconsistent rules and regulations in their learning environment, they're not able to really engage in the learning and community building processes that are really part of education and at the heart of what we do. The more time that they are spending kind of navigating those rules in your classroom, the less time they're spending really learning and building those relationships with their classmates. Now, we recognize some policies and procedures are really beyond the scope and decision-making of the teacher. But for those that are within your control, I highly encourage that you actually include your students in establishing those norms, those classroom rules and regulations together, It can be such a community building and trust building exercise that creates the learning environment that you want between your students and the relationship with you. And it's a great way to build student buy-in into maybe some of the expectations that you have. So we hope that by now you have a solid understanding about what it means to examine your classroom policies and procedures for bias, and really why it is important for you and your students to do so. Okay, so now that you understand the what and the why of examining your policies and procedures for bias, you might be left thinking, okay, but what do I do now? What does this look like in practice? If you haven't done so already, this is a great moment to pause this video so that you can make sure that you have your free ebook in front of you, whether it's printed out or on your computer, so that you can take a moment to answer these questions on your own. If you need the link again, it is in the description below. Okay, let's get started. Let's use the example of a policy and procedure favorite, hall passes, to walk through a few of these questions to really help us reflect and dive deeper into our own classroom policy and what it looks like in practice. You will want to answer these questions openly and honestly, otherwise this process is not going to be as fruitful as it could be for you. And once you've answered these questions, reread your responses. Take the time to see what you've written there. And if one of your replies doesn't really seem to sit right or really align with the values that you think you have and how you view your educational experience and the classroom you want to build, take a look at that specific aspect and kind of consider starting there as a way to implement change in your classroom. There are so many things that we can change. You really just want to start with one. Use your responses to the questions to help you adjust your policy to be more positive and to clearly express your expectations and values for your students. And then see how your students respond, see how it impacts your classroom environment. So, in the case of a student needing to leave the classroom, think about, how does a student access the bathroom, nurse, or seek permission to leave the class? Are they required to ask you in front of the whole class? Or do they raise their hand and rely on you to see them? Or is there another practice that you have in place? Why is that the practice? Is there a physical object that they have to take with them to prove that they have permission to be outside of your classroom? And is there a certain time limit on the pass, or are there certain periods of time where there is restricted access to leave your classroom? How many students do you allow out at one time? Do you consider the use of the bathroom or to see the nurse to be a privilege or a right? How are these expectations set? Is there buy-in from the class? Or were the rules just dictated by you? What do your answers reveal about the level of trust that you place in your students? Do students have your trust automatically, or do they have to prove themselves and earn it before they're able to leave the classroom? Like I mentioned earlier, there might just be some policies or procedures that your school enforces that you just don't have full control over. And in the case of hall passes, there might be school-wide expectations that you are expected to model. For me, early on in my career as a teacher, I worked at a school that had a strict policy of only one student outside of the classroom at a time. And at the time, I didn't really have a problem with it. In fact, I felt like having that strict policy, it actually helped to foster a greater respect from the students in my classroom. However, looking back, I might actually take a different stance at this point in my career. As I grew more experienced, and even moving from teaching science in a high school setting to a middle school classroom, which you might think would need more structure, I actually realized that if I flipped that policy on its head, if I was more generous with my hall passes, so to speak, it actually created an opportunity to foster a greater culture of trust, and it became an opportunity for me and my students to have open dialogue together about what responsible use of a hall pass looked like. Even with sixth graders, they are able to discuss and collaborate together on creating the classroom expectations that you probably want. We were able to actively build a trusting and kind learning environment that we all wanted. Students were encouraged to ask to see the nurse or to use the bathroom, or even to advocate for a stretch break to the water fountain if they just needed to reset and refresh before returning to engage in some deeper learning activities. And I felt like that had such a positive results with my students. And simple things like examining a hall pass policy with your students can be turned into an opportunity to collaborate and foster open dialogue, which helps to build trust, empathy, and respect. If I was to return to my first school that I talked about in my story today, the one that had the stricter hall pass policy, I would actually probably use that now as an opportunity to engage students and the administration in actually considering a policy change. It could be an opportunity for the students to practice some important advocacy skills, to work together, and to create a policy that works for all as opposed to just a few. So now that we have gone through step one and have talked about creating an anti-bias classroom by examining policies and procedures for bias, and you're on your way to step two, you might have a few or a lot of questions that are surfacing for you right now in this process. As you probably have noticed in the accompanying ebook, which hopefully you have downloaded already, it is available for free if you haven't, we've included some additional topics and questions to help you examine those policies for bias in your classroom. However, please know that this is not an exhaustive list. It is really just a place to get you started and to get you thinking and reflecting. Additionally, please know that we are here for you as you go through this process, examining your policies and procedures in order to build a more equitable learning environment for all of your students to be seen, heard, and affirmed. Do not hesitate to reach out to us if you find yourself stuck or just want to talk through some of these concepts and questions. Our contact information is listed in the description below, and we also have additional resources on our website. We really wish you the best of luck in your journey to becoming the anti-bias educator you know your students deserve. You got this.